Welcome, everyone, to Indications and Warnings with Chuck Pfarrer, co-produced by Alan Brewer. Chuck and I are recording this episode of Indications and Warnings on July 6, 2025. It is day 1229 of Russia's full-scale genocidal invasion of Ukraine. And Chuck, as the summer develops, it appears that Russia is doing exactly what we have talked about on this program the last couple of times. That is intensifying the terror war with drones and missiles aimed at Ukrainian civilians.
Yeah, we've been reporting on this, of course, for the last pretty much 3 years. The number holds higher than 95% of Russian precision strike munitions hit civilian buildings, infrastructure, and let's just say non-military targets. And I'm talking obstetric hospitals, pediatricians, and it's hospitals. They've destroyed 1,500 plus hospitals and clinics. An alarming trait that we've seen is the Russians have modified Shahed weapons payloads. They have a modular payload bay. And alarmingly, they're arming them with either thermite or magnesium-based incendiary warheads, also that include a napalm-like component. Now, napalm is jellied gasoline. This is not a petroleum-based incendiary. It is a magnesium/thermite based incendiary, but it has a clinging property. I don't know the chemistry of it, but this stuff clings. We've seen an significant uptick in fires, post-blast fires, and just to twist the blade, to take it right out of Hitler's playbook, also submunitions that have delayed fusing.
Oh, yeah.
So are literally designed to kill civilians and first responders, straight out of Adolf Hitler's textbook for the Blitz of Blitz of London.
Yeah. I saw an article about that, Chuck. So these are leftover bits. They're small. They're scattered all around the impact area, and they can explode anytime within an hour, 6 hours, or even 20 hours later. So by that time, if you are walking by the impact site, or if you're a first responder doing search and rescue, one of these bomblets can explode and kill you, or certainly wound you. And they're just scattered all over the area of impact now.
Right. And, submunitions and delayed fuse submunitions have a military utility on the battlefield. For example, the War College term would be aerial denial munition, right? So it goes out over the battlefield, it explodes, and scatters bomblets and or mines. I want to focus this in on the target. These are weapons aimed at city centers. It's not aerial denial when you are releasing these submunitions in a populated area deliberately. And as Alan just said, who's going to get them? First responders, rescuers, children walking to school the next day. They are insidious. Varying fusing mechanisms, simply a time delay. There are photoelectric delays. What does that mean? Piezoelectric. It's laying there on the ground, and you put your shadow over it. That changes the dynamics of the circuitry, and it goes off. Look, these are terror weapons. And again, look, these are war crimes. It's black and white. I've noticed that CBS News was commenting on it last night. No one's commenting on it. BBC, NBC, CNN, no one's talking about this, but we are.
Yeah, we are, and we'll continue to talk about it. And to talk a little bit more about the intensifying drone and missile campaign that Russia is launching against Ukrainian cities, I'm just looking at a chart in front of me, Chuck, of simply counting up the number of drones that Russia has launched from January to the end of June, beginning of July. In January, 2,500 drones. In February, almost 4,000 drones. In March, more than 4,000 drones. April fell back to just 2,300 drones. May intensified again to 3,500 drones. But the remarkable number, of course, is in the month of June, 5,412 drones launched against Ukrainian cities. These are all Shahed type drones, and they come in many guises these days. Some are filled with thermobaric munitions, some are filled with shrapnel, some are decoys. In fact, the number of decoys on that night when there were more than 550 targets in the air, the number of decoys was almost half of that number, right?
Right, absolutely. And the Shaheds are getting more and more complex. For example, you have pictographs loaded into the guidance systems, the algorithms. It's flying along with a thermal camera. And with the thermal camera, it can see I've crossed a river. And it compares that with the flight path, the map that is loaded into the system. The bad thing about a precision weapon that is guiding itself like that, the way a Tomahawk does, or other American air-launched cruise missiles, for example, the Storm Shadow, it has terrain mapping built into it, so it is less very highly resistant to electronic warfare. Not totally resistant, but in terms of what Ukraine has, in terms that kind of a drone is very hard to stop. That being said, Ukraine is pressed very hard by this level of attacks. But on that night where we had 550 total threats, Ukrainian air defenses, both kinetic air defenses and electronic warfare air defenses, they downed 86% of the incoming drones. That's fantastic. But that 12% that gets through is hitting apartment buildings.
Yeah.
They're hitting the entrance to bomb shelters. I mean, that's the egregious part of it. And even though hitting 86% of the incoming, that's a pretty good number, but when you've got that on the target equation, it's really costly.
And of course, the morning after that massive attack, which did set a record of terror that Russia had launched in one night, the morning after, Kyiv was enveloped in toxic smoke.
It was horrendous. You know, I've seen Beirut burn like that, and I've seen a burn like that in the California wildfires that came down to Malibu. It's biblical. You know, you talk about the sky of color, the sun, the color of blood. That's what we saw. The city was ablaze,
Yeah.
and that's 12% of the drones getting through. So you can see that they've upped the destructive effect of these munitions, and let's call it what it is, the terror effect.
Yeah. The other disturbing thing about that attack is it came hours after Trump and Putin had a phone call. And I think Putin finally made it clear to Donald Trump that he's not interested in peace. We'll talk a little bit later in the show about other steps that Putin has taken, demonstrating that he intends to carry out this war until he achieves his goals. He's not going to let anyone derail him. But it was especially disturbing that this massive attack occurred after a phone call with Donald Trump. It was equally disturbing to learn that U.S. weapons supplies to Ukraine had been halted that very day. In fact, there were weapons already staged in Poland ready for delivery to Ukraine, including Patriot air defense missiles, Chuck?
You know, I think Washington is going to get the message. I very optimistically thought after the president assumed office, I did predict, we both did, the intransigence of the Russian side. We did predict they would stick to their maximalist you know, demands. We did predict skullduggery and not negotiating good faith. But I very naively thought it would take the president about 4 weeks to realize that he's being played as a mug. There is no doubt in my mind. You have to realize that you speak to the President Putin. He basically tells you to pee up a rope. He says everything I want is what I want. That's it. You hang up the phone, and then he launches the largest drone attack of the war. Mr. President, get the message, right? You understand what's going on here? And it isn't a good look that you stopped arms deliveries, some of the very weapons that are necessary to defend Ukrainian cities, and you let this happen. But again, I am forever optimistic. I don't know why, because I'm actually a pretty cynical person. But Alan, why don't you fill everybody in? Following that murderous attack, President Zelensky said that he had, in his words, the best phone call he's ever had with President Trump.
I know this is just today that Zelensky said that, and it makes your head spin a little bit, Chuck, because you know, where is Trump's Ukraine policy? Does he have a Ukraine policy? Or there are a few questions that you need to begin to ask, this summer being the right time. Can Ukraine win without U.S. help?
That's a good question. I like to turn it around, look at it from a geopolitical standpoint. Is the United States going to win if Ukraine is lost? No. It is in the concrete interest geopolitically of the United States to see a free and prosperous Ukraine, and might I also say, a Russian army that has been chastised in Ukraine. So they won't do it again. They're going to think twice before they ever do it again. So that's what has to happen. The very interesting, today I was listening to The Foreign Desk with Andrew Mueller. If you don't listen to him on Monocle, folks, turn in. But he had some very interesting guests on today, and they reminded everyone that you can have a war going on, a conflict, and it appears to the world to be a conflict in stasis. It's stalemated. It's never going to change. Now think to Syria for a second. It never changes until all the cards collapse. And Alan and I talk quite a bit about the diminished combat effectiveness of Russian troops, their abysmal morale, poor unit cohesion, bad command, bad training, bad weapons, bad everything. Anytime the next person who tells you, look, it's a frozen conflict, Ukraine can never win, remind yourself of that. It's the Russian forces that are going to collapse. That is never going to happen to the Ukrainian forces. And there's a big difference there in potential outcome.
Yeah.
The Russian army is eating its own guts out. The Ukrainian army is getting stronger and better trained.
Well, they actually extended the training time of Ukrainian recruits from 49 days to 51 days. Doesn't sound like a long time to be trained as a soldier, especially to fight in the 21st century war. But interestingly, Chuck, those additional days of training are devoted exclusively to how a soldier can protect himself or herself from first-person drones on the zero line.
Right. And, that goes from, in my day, it was when you're moving, you say in your head, I'm up, he sees me, I'm down. Right? So that was it. That was how long it took someone to point their rifle at you and try to get a bead. Every soldier in the United States knows I'm up, he sees me, I'm down. Now the threat is not getting hit by an enemy rifle bullet, it's getting clobbered by an FPV drone. So those tactics are fundamentally necessary to surviving on the battlefield. Because being an individual soldier on the battlefield, it's a bit like being the Navy's fleet in being. If you get to the front and get killed in 15 minutes, you have done nothing,
Yeah.
right? You've got to stay. The number one goal is to stay alive.
Yeah.
Even if that means fighting another day, you got to stay alive on the battlefield to carry out your missions, your unit's missions.
Ukraine has also developed a drone killer piece of ammunition. So this is a magazine killed specifically with ammunition intended to shoot down drones. It's a magazine that can be inserted into any standard weapon issued on the zero line. I mean, it's a bit like trying to take down a drone with a shotgun, I guess.
Yeah, so what they've invented is the rifle caliber cartridges, and they're making them for two principal calibers. Well, there are three actually, but the two main ones, 7.62 intermediate Russian, standard Russian bullets. There are other Russian bullets. I know, folks, you can put it in the comments, and 5.56, which is the NATO caliber. So instead of shooting a solid bullet, this thing has a regular charge. It cycles in the weapon. You can fire on full auto. But when the bullet leaves the barrel, it starts to break up, so that a bullet is 2/10 of an inch wide, right? That's 223 caliber. The reason it's good on the battlefield, that solid bullet, is it's traveling at a couple times the speed of sound. It hits you, and it doesn't do good for you. This puts out a cloud of fringes. So instead of hitting a target like this, and you've now got something this big. So we have seen video from the zero line, this stuff in action, this ammunition, and it absolutely works. So could be a big step forward.
Yeah. Every soldier probably will want to carry a couple of those magazines on the zero line. And just to return for a moment, Chuck, to the weapons that were cut off from delivery to Ukraine, and I still have not heard whether or not delivery has now been approved. But this is a list of the weapons that were withheld. 92 AIM missiles, 30 Patriot missiles, 8,496 155 millimeter howitzer rounds, 142 Hellfire missiles, 252 Gimler's missiles, 25 Stinger missiles, 125 AT grenade launchers. That's not a huge percentage of America's arsenal, Chuck.
No, it really isn't. And it was America scored an own goal here, right? They announced their curtailing weapon shipments. This horrendous attack unfolds. I kind of wonder. Zelensky said this is one of the best phone calls he's ever had with the president. It's too quick to fill in this conclusion, but it suggests to me that perhaps President Trump said, "Look, we're going to have to try something different, i.e., the Brewer Doctrine, and arm Ukraine to allow them to defeat Russia." And perhaps, I'm hoping, the United States, unfortunately, may be waiting for another Russian attack to finally say, okay, we've given you every chance we possibly can. I mean, Putin's been given 2-week notices more times than I've been married, which is a lot, folks. It could be time to say, look, we gave you every opportunity to go to the peace table. Now we're going to try something else. And God willing, that's what's going to happen.
Well, I think that this massive attack on Kyiv certainly changed the minds of a lot of people watching the war. A group of senators and representatives immediately got together and and sent a letter to Trump demanding answers about why this weaponry was delayed. Uh, the the fact of the matter is, when I first read about it, the question that occurred to me, Chuck, was can Putin win without Trump's cooperation? And it seems to me he has had Trump's cooperation since Trump became president.
Well, the United States has certainly done much less than it could do. And, we went from a national security advisor, I'm not to name him, Jake Sullivan, who was literally hiding under almost hiding under the table in the Situation Room, worried that Russia was going to try to nuke the United States. That's preposterous. Now we've got a national security advisor and a national security apparatus that is totally captive to the president. I don't know that they're getting good advice. And I don't know why, if you have a PhD in national security from Georgetown, you cannot grasp that Russia is the perennial enemy of the United States. Perennial enemy, those aren't my words, those are the Russian words. That is their nomenclature for the United States of America. We are their perennial foe. So, and I mean, we say this again and again, and I think our listeners know it. Look, Ukraine is not the only goal here, right? This isn't all they want. They want Latvia, they want Estonia, they want Lithuania. Don't take it from me. Listen to the propaganda being spouted in Moscow. That's what they want. They threaten to nuke Paris, London, Oslo daily, right? They need to be put in the box, folks. I mean, I'm actually a peacenik, but I tell you what, I don't want to give my lunch money every day to a bully. It's never going to stop.
It is never going to stop. In a way, Russia has more reliable allies and partners than Ukraine has, and its allies prove that every day. North Korea is going to deploy 30,000 additional troops. In fact, they're not taking the slow train from Vladivostok. They are being airlifted from Pyongyang in Russian transport planes. So I don't know how many trips it'll take to get 30,000 North Korean troops and their equipment to wherever they want to be deployed to. Maybe it's in Kursk, or maybe it's around Pokrovsk. I don't know. But 30,000 more troops from North Korea. Do you think that's going to make a difference? What if they were all poured into Kursk, Chuck?
We still deal with this problem of command and the utilization of the resources. There was a very interesting post today written by a Russian soldier, and being as respectful as he could, saying, look, we are sent on these attacks. This is a Russian soldier talking, and these are the things you and I talk about. We go on these attacks. They're not coordinated with artillery strikes. We don't get artillery softening up the front line before we get there. We are walking in a number of kilometers where we are attacked every step of the way by first-person drones. And most of us are killed just on the insertion phase. When we do get there, we find that the positions we assume are under accurate fire already by the enemy. Ukraine is not looking for where these guys could deploy to. They know exactly where they're deployed to. And this soldier is begging Putin and Shoigu and everyone else to look into this. Look, you might as well whistle that down the wind. But what's important is that we see, here's a soldier confirming what you and I talk about a lot. Look, there are no battlefield, we know this, Alan, you know this. There are no battlefield commanders. There are no competent officers. They don't give a damn. They don't care how many casualties that they incur in these ill-conceived operations, and there is no governor on it. You have a platoon in the United States Army, and you lose it in day one of combat. You're gone. You're gone. That just doesn't matter to the Russians. It never has, which is something to get through our heads. It doesn't matter to them.
Yeah.
Period.
It's pretty much Soviet doctrine that has lasted to this day. So those 30,000 additional North Korean troops being deployed.
Well, I would say this. Look, that's a big number, right? And again, I use this all the time. That's a big number of Omar Bradley were in charge of them, right? Or General Sherman or somebody. But just 30,000 people that you are going to fritter away in platoon-sized attacks, not supported by artillery, not coordinated with air support, with no objective, no fundamentals of military science, to multiple vectors of attack, engaging an objective with combined arms maneuver warfare, it would be a significant force. The way it's commanded now, deployed, led, equipped, I'm not impressed. Big number, absolutely.
Yeah.
They could be dead in 30 days.
Yes, they could.
They could be dead, every one of them, in 30 days.
Yeah. There are 4 areas where Russia is building up strength. One, of course, aimed at Sumy out of Kursk Oblast. Another around Vovchansk, which is to the northeast of Kharkiv. General Syrskyi, the overall commander of the Ukrainian army, reported that Russia has built up 111,000 forces around Pokrovsk, and there have also been reports of Russian buildups around Kyiv. It could be to any of these places that these new North Korean mercenaries, I mean, they're state-ordered mercenaries when you come right down to it. They're the Hessians that the Russians have employed, right?
Yes. And Thomas will put up the Sumy map here to just get into this. And because as Alan and I were just saying, so indicators are that there are 50,000 Russian forces deployed into Sumy Oblast. And if you are looking at that map, which was 5 July, 1520 UTC, with a 50,000 man force, and you're asking me to go maybe 30 kilometers into Sumy, that's an appropriate number of troops to undertake that objective. Here are the major buts. With adequate intelligence, the Russians are not able to get, and they lack the training, the leadership, everything else, to disperse a force, bring it together to the line of departure, and step off in a coordinated manner. If they gather that many troops together, the Ukrainians are going to smother them. The other thing is been a total evolution in what is called the forward edge of the battle area, right? So that used to be, there's a sort of the zone was about twice the distance that a rifle could fire. So about 800 meters was this sort of fuzzy zone that you couldn't really draw a line. And that has changed totally now. So the forward edge of the battle area is actually 15 or 20 kilometers, because within that zone, anyone can get smoked by a drone. So Russia has 50,000 guys here, but they just don't have the ability to actually use them in combined arms maneuver warfare at tactical units larger than the platoon level. And a platoon's about 30 guys. A rifle squad, give or take, is 10 guys. They normally put those attacks in that size, and 80% of their guys get smoked on contact. And, this is me saying it. You don't have to believe me. Let's look at that Russian soldier. He said the same thing. You send 10 of us to the front, 2 of us might make it to the position you're sending us to. And then, Alan, like we say, it's one thing to get there. Now you got to be fed. Now you got to be given ammunition, and you're going to be dead in 3 days without water. So 50,000, a significant force. Could they get to Sumy? I doubt it.
Okay.
I doubt it.
Do you think that Ukraine will have to redeploy forces in order to meet this threat?
Yes, absolutely. This is the most that these Russians are going to accomplish here in Sumy is to compel Ukraine to take their presence seriously. I know that competent Ukrainian officers are and military engineers, they're surveying, what is between the zero line and Sumy. We're going to need to make defensive positions, minefields, ambushes. You mine the bridges, so they're ready to blow when you need them. So what the Russians are doing in Sumy is pretty much what the Ukrainians do in Kherson. The force being in Kherson Oblast occupied by the Ukrainians, it compels the Russians to keep a similar force, and basically out of the war. If you are between Melitopol and the Kinburn Peninsula, you might as well be on Mars, right? You're not in the fight. You're not where the pointy end is. If there's anything good about Ukraine deploying to the north, these major forces can operate in support and move if there is a breakthrough in Pokrovsk, Bakhmut. But the thing that does complicate this, and this is where Russia needs generals. Maybe they have more talent that I know. You want to gain some ground in the east. You need to push at Sumy the same time you break out of Bakhmut and the same time you don't go for Pokrovsk. You go south of it and head west. Am I giving the Russians ideas? Yeah. I'll mail it to them. Let's see if they can execute it.
I don't think they've been able to execute anyone's ideas thus far. Um, the casualties continue to pile up for the Russians. It's more than 1,000 a day. The most recent casualty number, 1,180 killed or wounded. There, are roughly 150 to 200 or more attacks along the zero line on any given day. And this is what that means. This is what the general staff of Ukraine's armed forces reported on July 5th, so yesterday. And these are the numbers actually for the 4th of July. There are 170 attacks all along the front line, involved Russia dropping 92 glide bombs, 44,800 artillery rounds. So, this is all along the zero line, but most of those attacks are still concentrated around Pokrovsk, and now also around Chasiv Yar, Torets, Kostyantynivka. Russia still enjoys superiority in artillery, Chuck.
Absolutely. And, in terms of volume of fire, meaning the number of shells the Russia puts into the air every day, it vastly exceeds the number of shells or return fire that Ukraine, lays back in return. You can look at it this way. The Russians never miss an opportunity to shell a barn, a crossroads, a village, in lieu of any military targets, which frankly they cannot find. Their tactical intelligence is not up to the standards of Ukraine. So what Ukraine does is, exquisite counter battery fire. Every day you can see the extremely high value targets that Ukraine engages. Battlefield radars, the zoo park systems, for example, air defense complexes, prioritizing targets like Russia's best self-propelled guns. Russia is one of the only countries that also uses extremely heavy mortars, bigger than 100 millimeters. And 100 millimeters is, that's the length of a cigarette, but it's a pretty big, pretty big mortar round. And so Ukraine, it can't shoot the volume of fire, but it can shoot more, can and does shoot more accurately. Ukraine is also better in fire support. So I call from the front line. I'm in contact. I can't expect adequate fire, but at least I'm going to get some. And the Russians themselves report that this is a murderously accurate fire.
Yeah. And Ukrainians are using reconnaissance drones to correct that fire, both for HIMARS and artillery and Ukraine's own big howitzers themselves. And I think they're doing a better job of it than the Russians.
Yeah, it does come down to this. You know, we're talking about the 50,000 Russian troops in Sumy. That's a resource. It takes a general officer. He's responsible for getting those resources in the right place, having a plan. You know, it's possible to take Sumy with 50,000 well commanded, well trained troops with a legitimately competent military plan. But Alan, and again, I say this: don't underestimate your enemy. But they show me again and again they don't have any competent general officers. They're company and platoon grade officers. They don't give a damn. And a platoon works because you've got a platoon leader. In the SEALs, we have a much smaller, what we call a platoon is actually much smaller. But there's like a bond between the platoon commander and the lads. You take care of the lads and they'll take care of you. And Russian soldiers report constantly. The officers are drunk. They tell us where to go. They don't go with us. We're not led. We're hoiked along, frog marched with bayonets. We can't get to the objectives. And this is why they lose 1.5 battalions every day, 2 battalions. When you lose 1,000 people a day, and no one's ever won a war losing 2 battalions a day. Those are Napoleonic losses, right?
People really have to be reminded of that. Anyone who tells you that this is a war that's stuck or frozen in place, well, tell them just to wait and see how these Russian casualties add up to a day of reckoning. Maybe that day of reckoning is coming in Kremina. We should take a look at the latest maps from Kremina, Chuck. Maps you published on 4 July and then on 5 July. And the two areas of interest, first, north of Liman, around the little town of Nove, and then east of Liman, in the Serebryansk forestry. Those are pretty much the two hotspots on these maps.
Right. So again, we see resource management on the Ukrainian side. The Russians are pushing, and it is Ukraine that is resource constrained. Right. They're short of everything: manpower, artillery, ammunition. They can never have enough drones, etc. And we've said before that around Nove, they've chosen to allow the Russians to take this land. And if you look very closely on the map there, you can see that the Ukrainians have got to, they've allowed the Russians to take this open terrain, which is incredibly hard to hold on to. And it's also incredibly hard to resupply, because the Russian ground lines of communication and supply have to traverse this terrain, agricultural fields, without a bush, without a tree, with no place to hide yourself. And, to summarize military tactics in a nutshell, you've got a military force, and we've said this a million times before, it's like a vacuum cleaner. You've got to plug it in. And the plug is your ground lines of communication and supply. You've got to have those. And think about that vacuum cleaner cord going across that vast open space. So Ukraine has let them take, a place where they've got to pay a lot of rent, and that rent's paid in blood. The other interesting thing on this map, of course, is the penetration that's happened south of Torsky. Well, before I get to the Cerebes forestry, Torsky is a place that has held, and Zerachane has held by the Ukrainians. That's one of the key places on this battlefield. I had 10-1 superiority with lots of paratroopers, and I was an American general, and they told me, when have you taken Torsky? It kind of shows the combat effectiveness. They should be able to take Torsky. It's the key to Le Mans, but they can't take it. Leadership, training, execution, and again, leadership.
Yeah. And there are no special natural features around Torsky that would make it more defensible. I mean, for example, it's not a Chazuvyar.
It truly it isn't. It's it's at the bottom of that lake. There is an outlet. There is, of course, a little water course, but 10-1 superiority here. It just in general, and a good leader will you need at least 3 to 5 to 1 at the point of attack. But the Russians just can't achieve that. And I truly get the feeling it's their commanders are not willing to apply the adequate numbers of troops and maneuver elements necessary to do it. And you know what? Why would they? Because right now, they send people into contact, 85% casualties, right? It doesn't mean Ukraine are super soldiers. Here's why that happens. I've got a platoon of Ukrainians. I'm out on the zero line. I'm controlling, I won't tell you how much of the zero line. The Russians are not sending 3 platoons against me, right? They're sending 1 platoon, an equal amount of force. If you are in the defensive, you have a natural advantage on the battlefield. The enemy's coming to you. They're paying the freight. They're burning the gas. They're coming to you. You sit there and wait. And he gets 400 yards away, pop. And in the meantime, in my days, you had to shoot them. Now it's FPV drones, or I could call in a jet to drop something on them. But it's changed warfare.
Yeah.
And Russia, I also have to say this. There are 2 armies in the world that are the most experienced in 21st century warfare. Ukraine, and a distant second is Russia. But Russia cannot overcome this Ukrainian defensive tactics. Or they could only do so at an enormous cost. 50, 60, 70,000 dead in Bakhmut.
Yeah.
Come on.
Well, the Russian experience in the 21st century war is being eliminated every single day through 1,000 dead and wounded. North Korea is very eager to get the same experience, to have the same firsthand education, especially in drone warfare. I think the North Korean troops will find the same thing. What they were sent to learn, they will leave on the battlefield. They won't survive to bring it home to North Korea.
Well, that's exactly what happened with their first 10,000 troops they sent in. And they suffered at least 40% casualties, and I've heard as high as 60%. So 6,000 dead in Kursk. And I'd also say another thing. You command 10,000 hardened, ideologically sound North Korean soldiers who will do anything that you tell them to do, and you get 40 to 60% of them killed. Right? Their individual light infantry skills were pretty good. You ground them up. And it's interesting. I look in the comments sometimes, and of course it's the trolling. But I'd like to point this out. You're in the bar and someone says, "Well, look, Russia's going to win this." Look, remind them that they've lost 1 million men. They're not going to win this, right? In the last 2 months, they've lost as many people as the United States lost in the Vietnam War in 10 years. Yeah. And they captured a little less than the size of Albuquerque, New Mexico, 460 square kilometers.
Yeah.
Okay, maybe they are winning. You buy the next round, okay? Let's play buy around here.
Well, very little territorial gain so far this summer, which I guess is why so many people are looking at this as a kind of frozen conflict. But that really would be, to my way of thinking, an incorrect assessment. Now, I'm often asked about Ukrainian casualties. The last time they were reported, President Zelensky actually reported them in February, and there was about a 4 or 5 to 1 ratio. So for every dead or wounded Ukrainian, Ukraine was killing or wounding 4 or 5 Russians, which is the ratio you need when you are the much smaller nation defending yourself against a very big, angry, mean, aggressive invader. And this is why I asked that question. Can Putin win without Trump's cooperation? He needs Trump's cooperation to keep fighting the war he envisions, which is to wear Ukraine down to a nub.
Yeah, Putin requires Western indifference.
Yeah.
He requires the U.S. to treat this as not our problem, not our war. I am optimistic that Washington is going to change its tune. Now, I don't know if that's going to happen. I'm still the guy who is happy to write that we are an inconstant, fickle, and undependable ally. That still stands. I am encouraged to see that Europe is getting this now. They're going up to generally to 5% GDP on their on their defense spending. That is good. I saw Portugal is sending arms and equipment. They're getting into the fight as well. Our good friend Nuno, Portuguese Special Operations Force guy, a terrific guy to follow. In this 1 to 4 casualty ratio, look, that is sound, and it is also indicative of a fight, a defensive fight. A well dug in defender can be expected to inflict that level of casualties on the attacking force. And again, I just sit there in my spider hole, squeezing the slack out of my trigger, waiting for the Russians who are going to come to me. Furthermore, we say this a lot, they'll be there at 10:30 in the morning, like they always are, time after time after time, down the same road, in column, dragging dust trails behind them, right? That's why they're getting waxed. So, Putin himself said he's willing to put 2 million dead into this project. He's halfway there. But again, frozen conflict, I don't know. You've got Ukraine holding, you've got Russia delivering the casualties, as they say themselves, not my words, the words of their general officers. They are throwing corpses at the problem.
Yeah.
You won't find a Western general, no words like that are going to come out of a Western general's mouth.
That was a terrifying statement by a Russian general, as a matter of fact, that they will fight this war against Ukraine by throwing corpses at the Ukrainian positions on the front line. And in essence, that is what Russia is doing, actually, in places around Pokrovsk, around Toretsk, around Chazivyar. Russians have not collected the dead from the battlefield. And not to put too fine a point on it, but it's the middle of summer, and those corpses stink to high heaven. And they don't actually care to recover them, frankly, Chuck, because they would be required then to inform the families that their soldier son or father or whoever has been killed in action, and Russia would then have to pay some kind of remuneration to that family.
It's I won't put too fine a point on it either, folks, but it is nightmarish. There are places where the corpses are literally atop the corpses, something biblical. But I again, so I want to pivot to again. We talked about volume of fire, et cetera. That Ukraine has to prioritize targets, whether they are logistical points of troop concentration, ground lines of communication. But the other thing that the Ukrainians have been exquisite in doing is discerning, locating, and striking C3 targets, command, control, and communication. And in Kursk recently, 4 HIMARS slammed into a deeply buried, hardened underground bunker where they killed the deputy commander of the Russian Navy, a major general in their naval infantry, all of his staff, and several other high-ranking officers, colonels, captains, etc., on the same day that they took out the commander of the Black Sea Fleet in a, let's call it an intelligence operation in Sevastopol, targeting command, control, and communication. Look, you can blow up all the Vatniks you want on the battlefield, but when you're decapitating their force commanders, when you're taking out the deputy chief of naval operations, who was probably being a battlefield tourist up there, but look, that wasn't a random strike. Signals intelligence, human intelligence, they tracked this clown, right? And you don't want him in a car. You want to get him stationary in a place where he is. And remember, you know, two things have to happen. You got to get somebody in geolocation and you got to get them in time. Flight time of those HIMARS, this was an exquisite strike and a little underappreciated, I think, in the media.
I think it was very underappreciated. And apparently, that general did, in fact, have a conversation on an unsecure phone line. And that's how the Ukrainians identified him and discovered where he was.
Right. And if you do want to weep for this guy, who I'll not dignify by calling his name, he once commanded the 155th Naval Infantry Brigade, who got their clocks cleaned twice at Vuhledar. But this guy is also responsible for the systematic murder of Ukrainian prisoners of war.
Yeah.
Rest in pieces, dude. And as we say, aloha oi.
Well, Russia continues to fight this war with two major methods or main methods, with terror against civilians and with mass on the zero line. These are the two methods that Russia continues to fight the summer campaign with, and potentially increasing both, intensifying the terror strikes against cities and bringing more recruits in from Russia, bringing in 30,000 more North Korean troops from North Korea. And now Russia has claimed that in the first 6 months of 2025, 200,000 Russians have signed new contracts to fight in Ukraine. And that's possible. I'm not sure exactly how quickly they're going to get there, how quickly they're going to go home. And Russia does continue to publicize that giant bonus that they pay, 5 million rubles. Most Russians would not see 5 million rubles in a lifetime. So this is an opportunity for them to get out of debt and to level their boat back at home. That is adding to the mass that Russia intends to bring to bear on the zero line. Do you think it's going to make a difference, Chuck?
Again, I don't know. 250,000 troops is a lot, but I said troops. I didn't say civilians. And by the way, folks, a ruble is worth a little less than 1 cent. And it's one thing to put your name on the dotted line there, but the chances are that you're actually going to get that money isn't very good. And the chances that you are going to go through an entire 1 year on the zero line, you aren't going to survive. And as Russian troops have discovered to their chagrin, you may have signed a 1 year contract, but you are in for the duration. And again, remember Syria. Look, that was a frozen conflict. It wasn't going to go anywhere. No one could win. To quote Andrew Mueller himself, Assad thought things are going pretty well, all things considered. 24 hours later, he was scrambling to the airport with all the luggage he could carry, with all the currency he could possibly get a hold of. And now he's in Russia, where if you outlive your usefulness to Putin, you're going to go off the end of a balcony, which, as we saw this weekend, the owner of the pipeline monopoly in Russia, for some reason, he decided to jump off the 11th story balcony, and he actually lived on the 7th floor. So a little mystery there to figure out, if you want to figure it out.
And the oligarch, the Russian oligarch who owns the largest gold mining corporation in Russia, was attempting to flee on his private jet to fly to Turkey, and that jet was forced to land. So he and his entire family are not going on holiday to Turkey, Chuck.
Who could have seen that coming?
Yeah.
If I were him, I would rent a 1-bedroom ranch house somewhere.
I think basement apartments in Moscow and St. Petersburg are among the most expensive you can rent or buy now. They're the safest.
Well, but and again, two things to look at. Dictators' powers are monolithic and unimpeachable until the minute they are not. Gaddafi, Ceausescu, Caligula. The history is littered with examples of these guys, and ditto with these frozen conflicts. All of a sudden it falls apart, a la Syria. But there are dozens of more examples in military history of armies falling apart in the field.
Yeah. So now to think about Ukraine, if Russia is prosecuting this war with mass and terror, Ukraine continues to prosecute its war with a lot of smarts and innovation, and what I'll have to call defensive preparation. I mean, it's not that Ukraine is avoiding battle, but they are inviting Russians to fight the war that Ukraine can actually win. Does that seem like a reasonable thing to say?
Well, absolutely, because you look at it this way. There seems to be, and evidence shows this, there seems to be some sort of quota that Russians have in terms of attack, right? They have to deliver these, as you said, what was it, 150 attacks along the zero line every day.
Yeah.
There's no rhyme or reason to these things. They're not coordinated. Even in the recent Zarabets map we have, you can see that these Russian attacks, they're not clustered in one place, which would indicate to me there's an objective. They are concentrating their forces. They're converging against their Ukrainian opponents, but we almost never see that. And again, this sort of, it's the Russians going to contact. It's the Russians losing between 50 and 80% at every contact. It is the Russians who fail to get 38% of their vehicles to the objective because they are abandoned, break down. And again, we mentioned this on the last show. How many thousands of videos have you seen of a Russian tank with all its hatches open?
Yeah.
Why do you abandon a tank with your hatches open? There's a bunch of bushes right there. You drive into the bushes, you cover your tank. No, they don't even do that. They don't want to drive that tank, Alan.
Exactly. They don't want to go back into battle. There are promised weapons that have been developed by Ukraine that will surely see their debut this summer. And I'm not only talking about the interceptor drones that were an urgent priority project. Those have been developed and tested, and they will be in the air over Kyiv and other cities in Ukraine. But I'm talking about longer range offensive weapons that Ukraine has developed. I'm looking at your graphic, Chuck, about the Korshun 2 cruise missile. So, in the absence of Ukraine's allies providing weapons like the Korshun 2, Ukraine goes to the drawing board, develops them, probably upgrades them in a certain way, or tailors them to the mission it knows it needs, and goes into manufacture itself. Over 60% of the weapons that Ukraine now uses in the war are made in Ukraine, Chuck.
Right. Well, and that was a national priority, and because the United States is not a dependable ally. Alan spoke calmly about it, but folks, literally, those weapons had been delivered to Poland for delivery to Ukraine, and Pete Hegseth decides unilaterally that they're not going to go. Good job, Pete. Good job, pal. I've never seen such an unqualified, garish PT Nazi Secretary of Defense. It's unbecoming.
Yeah.
And it's counterproductive to the national security interests of the United States. I might humbly suggest, Mr. Secretary.
I've never seen anything like it, and I hope
we never will.
Hope it comes to an end quickly. I hope somehow Trump sees the light. And again, as you've emphasized, Chuck, President Zelensky said he had the very best phone call with Trump he's ever had. He also said that he felt that Trump was well informed, which apparently is something that Trump is able to disguise almost every day. But if Zelensky is right, then maybe there is reason for optimism. Maybe Trump will send Patriot systems to help defend Ukraine. This is what gets me. Trump, who says he wants to end the killing, cuts off supply of a purely defensive weapon to protect Ukrainian civilians and preserve their lives. These are two contradictory things for Trump to be doing.
Yeah, they are. And there is no single weapons system that is going to turn this around. Look, ATACMS are great. Everything Ukraine has paid for or has been donated. Look, javelins are good. Everything that Alan ticked off there, they're all good. But in order to win this war, Ukraine has got to conduct combined arms maneuver warfare. Combined arms means I've got artillery, air, electronic warfare, everything working together to support my mechanized forces or my ground pounders. Everything has to come together. That's why generals are resource managers. They have to come together. So in order for me as a Ukrainian officer to stage a large-scale combined arms maneuver warfare offensive operation, I have to look over my shoulder. That vacuum cord we talked about, it has to be full of everything I'm going to need. Tomorrow, 72 hours out, 2 weeks out, everything I'm going to need to conduct this offensive. That's going to happen. And we know how Russia will react because we saw in Kherson where they retreated 40 kilometers in one night to scramble across the river. We saw in the Kharkiv offensive where the First Guards tank army evaporated into nothing. They abandoned their vehicles. Thousands of people were captured, although the Ukrainians have never said how many. But the Russian army fell apart. And the Russian army now is much weaker than it was then. It's more badly supplied. They are worn out. Their morale is worse. Their equipment is worse. So we'll see it eventually, Alan. Unfortunately, I keep talking in these 4-year increments. I don't see a solution for another 4 years. And 2 years ago, I was saying 4 years.
Yeah.
So I've lost 2 years.
You've lost 2 years, and Trump hasn't helped you make a better prediction than
He's,
that, has
he's
he?
killing me, Alan. He's killing me here.
And he's killing Ukrainians, frankly. Uh, Chuck and I are going to be back with more maps this coming week, and more analysis. I do want to remind people, keep your eye on Russia's terror war. The head of the Ukrainian unmanned forces, using Ukrainian intelligence, predicted that this summer Ukrainian cities, or Ukraine, will see some night more than 1,000 drones and missiles in the air. And that is Putin's plan to intensify the terror war.
Yeah, and bear in mind, folks, Russia has strategic bombers. They don't have the ability to penetrate Ukrainian airspace. When they do launch air-launched cruise missiles, they're launched over the Caspian Sea, hundreds of miles away. So I do think as Alan just predicted, we are going to see 1,000 drone strikes. The other thing to look for in your information streams is there are many guys who post the routes of all these drones as they come in. You can see these are chess matches. And as Alan said, we saw in the last 500 drone strike, 250 approximately decoys.
Yeah.
Right? This is a chess game to converge weapons, overwhelm air defenses at the point of attack. I mean, not randomized at all. This is a chess match. And again, a battle of resources. And Ukraine needs the air defense, but they also need a reliable partner.
Yeah.
We're not there yet.
No, we're not, and we weren't there under the Biden administration either. I'm not forgetting that. So, among the things that Chuck and I will be keeping our eyes on this week, what is happening up in Sumy? Maybe within a couple of weeks' time, we'll know where these new North Korean troops are being deployed. We'll come back with some information about a Ukrainian strike on the Russian naval base in Novosibirsk. And we will be back with a live stream too. But please post your questions in the comments. And Chuck and I do read those comments. We appreciate them. We really appreciate if you share indications and warnings with friends and colleagues, so that more people can get solid information about Ukraine and understand why they really should care about what is happening in Ukraine. Don't let people forget that Ukraine is not only fighting for its own freedom and to defend itself, it really is fighting to defend democracies in Europe and to defend values that America can live by.
Yep. Look, Ukraine wants a bright and prosperous, democratic and free future. It does not want to be a crushed, defeated, post-Soviet satellite of Russia, right? We know what Russia will do to Ukraine. They're the Hokals, right? They're the victims of the Holodomor. They're worthless. They're nothing to Russia. This is an existential war for Ukraine and for Putin.
Yeah.
I'm just making a big prediction here. This war is going to end in a Russian defeat, and Putin is going out with it. So that isn't happening tomorrow, next year, or anything. The next waypoint for me, Alan, is let's see how these Russian forces, attrited, culminated, undersupplied, exhausted. Let's see how they do this winter. And winter is not that far away.
It really
October,
isn't.
it's
It
going
really
to be
isn't.
cool.
Here it is, July 6, 2025. It is day 1,229 of Russia's full-scale genocidal invasion of Ukraine. And with that, Chuck and I will bring this episode of Indications and Warnings to a close. Slava Ukraini.
Heroim Slava. And folks, Alan and I fight over who gets to say this, but look, please like and subscribe, not for our ego. It helps us beat the algorithm, and tell a friend and win those battles in those discussions. We're here to be help you dominate your information warfare microcosm. And we'll see you soon.
Thanks, Chuck. Good night.